Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Anna Anderson, and I work for Disability Rights Wisconsin as the voting rights coordinator here. I'm also the co-chair of the Disability Vote Coalition in conjunction with Jenny Nugert from BPDD. I'm sure she'll introduce herself in a minute. And so today we're going to talk about whether are you ready for the upcoming election. First, I'll just if this is okay, I'll just ask Jenny and Wendy to introduce themselves. We're kind of the three amigos here, or amigas, kind of putting this together and running the Disability Vote Coalition in conjunction with our partners. So, Jenny?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Jenny Nugert. I'm the co-lead of the Disability Vote Coalition, and I work for the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities.
Thanks. Wendy?
And hi, I'm Wendy Hine, and I do voter outreach with the Disability Vote Coalition. I work for Disability Rights Wisconsin, and I mainly focus on the southeastern part of the state.
Great. Thanks to both of you. If you don't know, which I know you do, there's an election in November. And it's a gigantic election for most people, presidential, so on and so forth. And Senate, and there's other things on the ballot as well. But I think most of us know this as the presidential election. So, are we ready for the presidential election? And some of you might be, and some of you might not be. So let's talk about how to get there. I'm all set, Jenny. Okay. First, we'll just talk about what the Disability Vote Coalition is. So we're a nonpartisan effort. We want to make sure that people can fully participate in the electoral process. So people with disabilities, so they can that can include registering to vote, actually casting the ballot, and accessing polling places, making sure that those are accessible to people with disabilities. We've already mentioned the coalition is coordinated by the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities and Disability Rights Wisconsin. We have some great, actually everybody on this coalition is pretty amazing. Very dedicated to making sure people with disabilities can cast a ballot, just like everyone. So we have community agencies. We have, I think most importantly, we have people with disabilities and lived experience on our coalition. We learn a lot from each other, and I just think it's a great coalition with a great mission. So if you ever want to join, there'll be some information at the end of these slides that can show you how to join our coalition and, make sure that people with disabilities have the ability to vote. I'm done. All right, let's talk about who is eligible to vote. So you have to be a US citizen and you have to be 18 years old on or before the election day. So if you are 18 on the day of the election, you can vote. You have to have resided in Wisconsin for 28 days before the election. And you can't be serving a sentence being incarcerated, being on probation or parole, or extended supervision for a felony conviction. Sorry. Most people know that the phrase like being on paper. So once you have served your sentence, including extended supervision, if that is something that's part of your sentence, once that's done, you get your right to vote back. So lots of people think that, well, I've had a felony, so I can never vote again. And that's just not true. And we want to make sure that people understand that because you had a conviction doesn't mean that forever you can't vote. And then you are also eligible to vote if you have not been determined by a court to be ineligible. So sometimes people that have guardians, a judge has determined whether or not somebody is eligible to vote. And it's determined by lots of factors. But the only way somebody's voting rights can be taken away is through a court process. So we have had issues with people saying, well, this person has been diagnosed with early stage dementia. I don't think they should be able to vote. And that's actually not a statement that you can make if somebody hasn't been determined ineligible to vote by a court. Good, Jenny. Thank you. And this is the next slide is dedicated to guardianship. So if a person under guardianship retains the right to vote, or a person under guardianship retains the right to vote unless, just like we said, unless a court removes that right. So again, that's the only way voting rights for people under guardianship can be taken away. There is a document called Determination and Order on Petition for Guardianship Due to Incompetency. So like the longest title ever, but that's the document that people get when a guardianship is established. And that's the document that will say whether or not somebody continues to have the right to vote. And so lots of people don't have that form. It comes separately from the actual guardianship paperwork, and it gets lost. And so we really recommend that if people don't know their rights, their voting status, that they need to look at this form. You can also request this form from the probate court where the guardianship was established. I think it's like $2 usually. You can also contact the municipal clerk. The clerk can check the list they receive from the state of individuals that have been determined to be incompetent and not able to vote. Not everybody is on that list. And that is, it's a list that isn't always up to date or complete, but it's one place to start. And then we have resources about voting and guardianship at our website that we have included there. There's some pretty comprehensive information about guardianship and also information about how to get your rights to vote back. Because just because you lose your right to vote at the beginning of this guardianship process, you can always petition the court to get those rights back. Sorry, excuse me. All right, are you registered to vote? This is a good place to let everybody know that today is National Voter Registration Day. This is the day that we really highlight getting registered and making sure you have that step done well before the election. So I apologize for this frog in my throat. So you can register lots of different ways, which is great. You can do this online. You have to have your photo ID has to be updated and current in order to vote. So you have to have your current address on there. You can do this up to 20 days before the election. You can do it by mail up to 20 days before the election. So lots of people want to mail their completed registration form in because we have, it's hard to get there. It takes time. If somebody doesn't have assistance in getting to the clerk's office, this is a good option. You can register in person at the municipal clerk's office that is assigned to your location. You have to provide proof of residence, and we'll talk about what proof of residence is in just a second. And Wisconsin has same day, election day registration at the polling place. So you also need to provide proof of residence when you, if you want to register to vote at the polling place on election day, you still need to provide proof of residence, and you'll also need a photo ID. And And then for voters who live in care facilities, this is a little more complicated. Somebody in a care facility might be able to vote with a special voting deputy. And that special voting deputy is also an election registration official sometimes. So if the special voting deputy is an election registration official, they can help you register. If they're not, then you have to register using one of the ways that we talked about above. That is a very complicated process. And I'm just going to say for the group, if you ever have questions about how does somebody living in a care facility or a residential facility, how do they vote? You can definitely contact our, and we'll get to where this is too, our website, but you can also contact our voter hotline and we'll be able to walk you through that process. Next. So what do we need to register to vote? If you want to do it online, we just talked about this, you need to have your driver's license or your Wisconsin ID card, and it needs to be up to date. So if you have an old address on there, that's not going to work for you, the online option. So you can also, when you do a paper form, which is if you mail it to your municipal clerk or you do it on the day of, or at your municipal clerk's office, you need an acceptable proof of residence document and your Wisconsin driver's license, an ID number, or the last 4 digits of your social security number if you don't have an ID. So that's good. Thanks. Go ahead, Jenny. Okay, so this is how we register online. This is myvote.wisconsin or .wi.gov. This is just the best, in my opinion, one of the best websites I've ever come across because you can get some really great information. It's very handy and it will tell you kind of exactly what you need to do going forward. So you can go on here and register to vote. You can see that in the blue circles. You can see that in the 4th one to the left. And that you can just click on that and you can go through the steps to register to vote. But again, we talked about this. If you want to register to vote online, you have to have that ID that is up to date. But that's where you can go. You can find out if you're registered by clicking on My Voter Information, which is in the gray boxes at the top, the first one there, My Voter Information. And they can tell you, or it will tell you if you're registered or not. Sometimes we just don't remember. So if you don't remember, that's where you go. They ask your name and your date of birth, and they can tell you if you're registered. Next. Okay. This is a very important slide because you have to, if you don't want to register at the polling place or if it's going to be difficult for you to get there, the online or by mail registration must be done by October 16th. So make sure you're doing it as soon as possible, as early as possible, so it gets to the clerk by October 16th. You can also register at the municipal clerk's office that is assigned to you or your address by November 1st, which is the Friday before the election. And then again, at your polling place, you can do it if you haven't gotten to it by the time the election happens, that's okay. You can do it at the polls and as long as you bring your proof of residence and your driver's license or your ID card. So you can vote. Next. Okay. Well, when we say bring your photo ID, what does that mean? That means that Wisconsin, you have to have a photo ID for voting. There are a couple instances where you might not need to provide a photo ID, but those are very few and far between. So acceptable photo ID for voting does not have to include your address. But it definitely does need to have your picture, obviously. And if you go to the bringit.wi.gov, there will be a bunch of information about things you can use to provide to be a photo ID. So things like a passport that works, a military ID. So there's a bunch of things that will work to be your photo ID to vote, but most people bring in their photo ID, their driver's license, or their identification. Next. So here's the photo IDs. These are the acceptable photo IDs. You can see that, let's see. So there you can, with a university or college ID, plus enrollment verification, you can use that. That's pretty important for our students in the state. And then if you haven't received or haven't updated your driver's license or your ID card anytime recently, just your attention should go to the Wisconsin driver state ID or IDPP receipt. That is on the top row all the way to the right. That's what gets printed off for you when you go to the DMV. And then they end up mailing your actual physical ID later, but you can use that to vote. Next. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to the wonderful Wendy Hine, and thanks, Wendy.
Hi, this is Wendy, and I'm going to talk to you about going to vote. Um, so, Anna talked to you about registering or like signing up to vote. Registering is what it's called. And now we're going to talk about voting and the different ways that we can vote. The first thing we're going to talk about is voting in person. And we're going to just talk about some ways to be prepared to vote in person. So we usually suggest that you use that website that Anna showed you, that My Vote website. It had all those little images at the top that you could click on, and one of them allows you to check your polling place. And so we always suggest that people do that because polling places can change. And especially this year, some of the voting maps changed. And so I think even more polling places might be changing because of that. So it's just a good idea to check where your polling place is before you go to all the work of, going there. So we suggest that you do that, and you can do that at that website. You can also call your municipal clerk's office if you prefer that. You can preview your ballot at that My Vote website, and that is a really cool feature. You can go there and you can see what will be on your ballot. I actually just did that, and it's for the November election for my ballot, because I wanted to see if there were any local races, any local things that I was going to have to vote on that I wasn't aware of and that I needed to be starting to learn about. And one thing I was surprised about was that there were like 6 or 7 options for president, and I was really only aware of 3. So that was interesting. But so it's just really cool because you can see everything that's going to be on your ballot. And I often just write it all down on a piece of paper and I take that with me. We'll talk about that with voter rights. We also suggest that you double check your voter registration. Make sure that you're signed up to vote the way that Anna just talked about. It's just a good idea to check that all things are ready and right, so that if for some reason you wouldn't be registered, you could be prepared to re-register. And then we also suggest that there are voters, we're going to talk later in the rights about curbside voting. We suggest that people call ahead if they're going to curbside vote. And we suggest that you plan ahead with transportation. So if you need to find a ride to the polling place, don't wait until the day before to do that, but think ahead about how you're going to do that. And then I'm going to talk to you about your rights as a voter with disabilities, and knowing those rights can be important to your voting experience. One other thing to remember is to bring that photo ID like Anna talked to you about, which ones are acceptable photo ID. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a couple of these rights to you when I was talking about voting in person. And you have, I always think about it sort of like an umbrella. You have this umbrella right that every American voter has to vote privately and independently. And then all the rest of these rights sort of are under that umbrella. They enable you to vote privately and independently. You have the right, every voter has the right to vote privately and independently. And that right shouldn't change because you have a disability. So in order for you to vote privately and independently at your polling place, you have to be able to get in there. So you have the right to access the polling place. That means that there has to be a physical route for you to get into the polling place, whether you walk in, whether you roll in, whether you use a walker or another assistive device, you have the right to access the polling place. You have the right to use an accessible voting machine, and we're going to talk about those shortly here. So I won't go into that, but that is a right that you have. You have the right to ask for reasonable accommodations. So some reasonable accommodations are like a chair to sit in. I often talk to voters who say, I can't wait in a line, but I want to vote in person. What can I do? And they can ask for a chair to sit in. And then when they don't get to skip to the front of the line, but when their spot in line gets to the front, then they could leave that chair and go in. That's a reasonable accommodation. A magnifying glass is a reasonable accommodation. And also assistance stating your name and address. There are a lot of voters who may not be able to state as soon as you come into the polling place, they ask you to state your name and address. And there are a lot of voters for different reasons who stating their name and address might be difficult. And they do have the right to assistance with stating their name and address. That can look like handing the poll worker your ID and they state the name and address. Or it can look like having your spouse who's with you to vote state your name and address in your place. But assistance is one of your rights. You also have the right to assistance with marking your ballot. And you can have anyone give you that assistance. It doesn't have to be a registered voter. If you have a guardian, it does not need to be your guardian. It can be anyone who you trust to help you mark your ballot. The only person that it couldn't be is your employer or your union representative, and that's for your own protection. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that you have the right to an accessible voting machine to use one. And in the little picture there is one of the kinds of accessible voting machines that there is. And if you look closely, you might be able to see that the woman who's using that accessible voting machine has headphones on. And what the headphones are for is that machine is able to read her ballot to her. And then in her hands, you can't see it, but she has this large kind of a remote control keypad thing with like some buttons that go up and down. And she's able to make her choices using that keypad. And then the machine reads her choices to her. And then she can print out her ballot. And it's a way for voters to privately and independently cast their vote. Now, you might look at this picture and say, well, that's not private. Look at all those people are looking. Well, this was actually at an event where we were teaching people about the machine. And so we wanted people to see. We would expect that in your polling place, this is placed differently, that the machine is so that you would be in a more private space to do that. That's what we would expect and hope. Sometimes that's not the case. And you can always call our voter hotline to let us know if there's something that you think isn't within the rights of the vote of your voting rights, and we would certainly help you with addressing those things. But so that's an accessible voting machine. Every polling place is required to have at least one accessible voting machine. And again, it's supposed to be positioned so that it's private. Anybody, though, can use the accessible voting machine. The staff shouldn't be asking about your disability or why you need to use it. Every single voter who comes to vote has the right to use that machine. Next slide, please. So a few more rights that you have as a voter with disabilities. You might be saying, holy cow, I have a lot of rights. And that's true, because you have the right to vote privately and independently. For some voters, that means that they need curbside voting. And if you can't get into your polling place because of your disability, you do have the right to vote curbside. I think people are more aware of this now after COVID, because actually there was a lot of voting places that did some version of this even for voters who didn't have a disability. But we've all gone back to pretty much the usual polling place. But this right existed before COVID, and it exists now, that a voter with a disability can do curbside voting. There are some polling places that have really great signs that explain to a voter where to park if they want to do curbside voting, how to get the staff to come out to your car, all those things. They might have a bell, they might have you call by phone. And there are lots and lots and lots of polling places that don't have any instructions for this. So this is why when we said that in order to be prepared to vote, if you're a voter who needs curbside voting, we suggest that in the week before the election, not on election day, but in the week before the election, you call the municipal clerk and you say, hey, I'm a voter. I'm going to need curbside voting. Can you please tell me what's your system for doing that? What do you want? How do I get your attention when I get there? What's the procedure? But that is a right that you have. You have the right to file a complaint if you feel your rights have been violated. I mentioned that to you when we talked about the accessible voting machine. If you feel like any of these rights have been violated, you have the right to file a complaint. And filing a complaint isn't being a whiner. Filing a complaint is really helpful to other people, because when you file a complaint, it gives the polling place the opportunity to make their space more accessible so that other voters don't have the same, don't have their rights violated in the same way. So you can file a complaint, and we can help you do that I'm going to give you some info later about how to contact us. If you make a mistake on your ballot, you can request another ballot. The poll workers will want you to give them the ballot with the mistake, because they count every single ballot and have to say where it is. But then they will give you a new ballot. You can bring a notes sheet into the polling place. Remember, I mentioned that when I go online and check my ballot, a lot of times I write it down. And especially I feel like, most of you aren't going to forget who you plan to vote for president. I think you probably know. But when sometimes in where I live in a little like suburban town. And sometimes they have like 6 positions that are on the city council or the town council. And it's all people I've never heard of. And it's not partisan. So you couldn't even say I'm going to vote this color, and I'm going to vote that color. You have to actually know who you want to vote for. So you have to look them up and everything. And then you have to remember what you learned about them, or which one you wanted to vote for. But there's 6 of them or 8 of them. And so for me, I have to write that down, or I'll be like, oh, I don't know if that was Jim or Dave or Joe. And I would be so confused. So I love this notes sheet thing. It's really helpful to me. And I think it's helpful too with later on, we're going to talk about uh, the some other things that are on the ballot that can be confusing. And so these notes can be helpful. The last thing I want to talk about, and it's in bold because it's super important. Nobody should tell you how to vote. Nobody can tell you who or what to vote for. That doesn't mean, I mean, we all talk about it, or maybe we don't. Some of you are super private. That's your right too. But a lot of people talked about it. They might talk to family or friends or colleagues or whoever, and they kind of, might debate things or think about why one candidate is preferable to another. But when it comes down to it, the voter is the only person who decides who or what they want to vote for. Even if the voter has a guardian, the voter gets to decide, not the guardian. Next slide. Okay, we talked about curbside voting a little bit. I mentioned it. I mentioned that the procedure is different at every polling place, and you should call your municipal clerk to find out the procedure, and that it is required to be available for any voter who can't enter their polling place due to a disability. Next slide. Okay, this is everything we've been talking about so far. Well, we talked about like voting in person, and then we talked about your voting rights, and your voting rights are your voting rights no matter how you vote. Now we're going to kind of switch gears and we're going to talk about another way to vote, which is absentee voting. And absentee voting means that you ask for a ballot and it gets sent to your house. And then you can vote at home and put it in the envelope and either take it to your municipal clerk or take it to your polling place, or you can mail it in. We would suggest that you request it as soon as possible and that you return your ballot as soon as possible because it is time sensitive. Next slide. So how do I request an absentee ballot? Anna mentioned to you the My Vote website. I've mentioned it quite a few times. A cool thing you can do is you can also request your absentee ballot online. And that's a cool thing because actually, then you can even see once they mail it that there's like, if you've ever ordered pizza on some of these apps or whatever, and you can see like making your pizza, the pizza's in the car on the way, your pizza's been delivered. You can kind of see that with your absentee ballot as well. That there's like a little timeline and you can see it move along. So, and that actually works even if you request your absentee ballot another of these ways, you will eventually see it at My Vote as well. You can request your absentee ballot by mail or email. Or you can even go into your municipal clerk's office and request an absentee ballot. This is like kind of tongue twister-ish. Next slide, please. So when you vote an absentee ballot, so now you've requested your absentee ballot, the ballot came to your house, and when you got it, it also came with a return envelope. And on the outside of the return envelope, there's what you see in the picture here, and somebody's pointing at it. It's a space where you need a witness, and the witness has to sign and include their address. And the witness needs to be a voter, somebody who's an eligible voter. And so, which is different than before I talked to you about who could help you fill out your ballot. And that is anybody except your union representative or employer. This is a registered voter. So you need the signature of this witness. And what the witness is signing is that the voter is the person who filled out that ballot. So they don't need to see what you voted for. They don't need to even look at your ballot necessarily. They just need to see that you're the person who voted it. So the voter is the person who voted. And then they sign that, and they need to make sure that they put their address on. Next slide, please. So these are important absentee voting deadlines. In order to be legal, you have to request your absentee ballot by October 31st, which is easy to remember since most of us know it's Halloween. But I'm going to tell you that with a November 5th election day, requesting your absentee ballot by October 31st is awfully tight timing. I don't know that it would really work out that you'd be able to vote. Maybe, maybe not. We would suggest, again, requesting your absentee ballot as soon as possible. And then you need to return it by election day, November 5th at 8 p.m. So you got to get it to your polling place before the polling place closes. Next slide, please. This is just, again, talking about voters with a disability and their rights. This is something that's kind of come up in the last couple of years. And because in Wisconsin, it's required now that only the voter can return his or her ballot. So if you vote absentee, you either need to mail your ballot back or you need to return your own ballot to the polling place. I can't just bring, if my spouse or my neighbor says, "Oh, you're going anyway, can you drop off my ballot too?" I can't do that. The voter can only bring their own ballot unless a person has a disability. And in that case, they do have the right to someone else helping them out and taking their ballot to the polling place for them. Voters with a disability can request assistance with mailing their ballot or delivering their ballot from anyone who's not their employer or a union representative. So that is a disability clarification or a disability right that you have. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's on the ballot. I think you probably have all know that the US president is on the ballot and the US House and Senate. So basically a lot of Washington, D.C. offices. Then also the state Senate and the state assembly, those are some Madison offices. And then depending on where you live, there might be some local elections. This is why it's super important for you to check your ballot, what'll be on your ballot, because you're going to want to know what those local elections might be. There's also a constitutional amendment on the ballot, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's talk about the constitutional amendment that's on the ballot. A constitutional amendment means that the Constitution gets changed. It's a change to it. And so it might be adding something, it might be just changing something. In Wisconsin, a constitutional amendment must pass the legislature in 2 consecutive sessions and be approved by voters in a statewide election before it officially gets added to the state constitution. Now, you might remember if you voted in the last election that we had 2 constitutional amendments on that ballot, and they were confusing language. And this time we're going to have 1 constitutional amendment that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. And again, the language is difficult. It's this legal language that is just really not the way that we talk or even the way that we write. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. Next slide, please. So this is the constitutional amendment on the ballot. It's going to be 1 question. And I'm not going to read the question. Well, the question is, I guess I will read it out loud to you, but it's pretty confusing language. Eligibility to vote. shall Section 1 of Article 3 of the Constitution, which deals with suffrage is the right to vote, be amended to provide that only a U.S. citizen age 18 or older who resides in an election district may vote in an election for national, state, or local office or at a statewide or local referendum. That is a lot of language, a lot of words. It kind of makes my brain just go foggy. So let's talk about what it means. If you vote yes, it means that you want to change our state constitution. And the change is very slight. You're changing one word. So right now it says every US citizen has the right to vote. And if you vote yes, it means that you want to change the wording to only US citizens have the right to vote. So listen, right now it says every US citizen has the right to vote. You'd be changing it to only US citizens have the right to vote. It sounds the same, but it's just kind of a subtle change. A no vote means that you want to keep the Constitution the same. So it's important to think about how one word can change something slightly, or it could open the door to different decisions in the future. But just something to, those are the things that you might want to consider as you think about that constitutional amendment. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about how you can be an informed voter. We talked so many times about that myvote.wi.gov website. It's just so full of great stuff and easy to work with. And then you can learn about the candidates at a few nonpartisan websites. It's really hard because if you watch TV at all, you're going to see all these ads, and typically they can be pretty persuasive for or against certain candidates. This is not the kind of information that we're looking for you. We're looking for, just factual, nonpartisan stuff. So that would be vote411.org, ballotpedia.org, and wisconsinvote.org. Those are websites where you're just going to learn really basic things about the candidates and not pushing you toward one candidate or another. We also ask that you would follow the Disability Vote Coalition. We send out e-newsletters. We're constantly sharing resources, reminding people of deadlines. And that's our Facebook page and our website. Next slide, please. So that's our website and our Facebook page there. And then in the yellow box is the voter hotline that I mentioned to you. You can call us or email us, and we can help you out if you have questions about really anything to do with registration, voting, disability rights that are related to voting. And we would love to help you out. You can also find your municipal clerk at that MyVote website and contact your municipal clerk directly. Next slide. Well, that might be it then. I think we're at the end here. So I think we could open it up for questions then. If anyone has a question for us. Oh, I see one question. Madeline?
Yeah, hi. I just kind of have well, this was super helpful, by the way, and I definitely learned a lot. I'm wondering if what do you think is a common misconception people have about registering to vote? Also, would you be able to send out these slides afterwards? Because I know a lot of people who I think are not here in my organization, who this information would be helpful for.
I believe they're posted on our website, and I can put that link in the chat here.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And a common misconception about registration. Well, I think it's confusing for people if they know anything about other states, because there are many states that have registration deadlines. And so in different we have deadlines, but we have we do have we have deadlines about voting, about registering online. We have a deadline about registering at your municipal clerk's office, but we do have same day voter registration where you can go to the polling place and register that day, the day of. In many states, it's the case that if you don't register by the end of voter registration, which the dates are different in all those states, then even if you want to vote on election day, you're out of luck for that election. So that can be really confusing. And then I think, we hear different confusion points from people in sort of different demographics. I think like college students, that's a whole confusion point because a lot of them are a little transient. They live in a dorm for part of the year. They live in a house for part, with their parents for part of the year. Some of them like live at a summer camp and work for part of the year or whatever at a national park. So that the transient address is difficult. We hear a lot from older adults that they've been voting for since they were 18 for 50, 60 years, and suddenly when they moved to an apartment, or maybe a lot of them have lived in their own home for their whole life, for just decades, and then they moved to assisted living or an apartment, and the whole registration process is just really cumbersome for them and surprising. So I think that's a challenge. I think the population of people who have guardians, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about guardianship and voting, and people being able to retain that right. I think there's some thought that there are some people um, who question, you know, other people. I think there's more and more we're hearing that there are people who have opinions about who should and shouldn't be voting. And so it's really important. We really that's why we always stress that the only person who can decide who that somebody is not capable of voting is a judge. No one else gets to decide that for someone. So I think I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's those are kind of some of the common registration misunderstandings that I think we hear.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, happy National Voter Registration Day. Thank you for being with us. And I think I'll let you guys, I said I would put that link in the comments. Let me get it here real fast. I have it just about at my fingertips. So, and then I'll let you guys head out 5 minutes early and maybe you can catch some sunshine. It looks beautiful out.
Don't forget to tell your friends to vote or check their registration.
Yes, today's the day, but they can do it tomorrow too. That's the
I
great
certainly
thing.
will. I certainly will do
Here
that.
we go.
Have a good one, guys.
All right, I'm clicking it right now if you want that link.
Oh, okay.
All right, there it is.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right,
We'll
thank you.
We'll have the video up there shortly.
Okay, sounds good. Love you guys.
You too.
So good to see you, Cindy.